Everybody, man, it's going to be a bad habit coming on here like this, but David Crosby just died. I really took. I really took that hard. He was a great music figure and also a cultural figure. I think he was one of the main survivors of the hippie period of the late 60s and early 70s. And I mean the classic hippie period. We call people hippies now, but it's not really the same. I mean the true historical hippie period, which really only lasted a couple years. He was sort of exhibit A in the hippie period. And he also, let us not forget, he has that kind of almost at this point clownish hippie image, but he was a great tenor. He was the golden pipes of the Byrds, and also then of course Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. I've got some Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young vinyl. These are some of the ones that were in the pile I bought at the flea market. The album I actually grew up with is So Far and Woodstock, which had several Sweet Judy Blue Eyes. But this is their first album. This is a great album, and this is the old days. I was lucky. Look at it, it's still in there. Look, this album is well taken care of. Must not have been mine. That's how I know it's not mine. It's still in good shape. But this has Glenevere and Wooden Ships, which were both David Crosby songs. And that Glenevere, I think it might be one of the most beautiful acoustic guitar songs I've ever heard. Glenevere. You just listen to it. Is it one or two acoustic guitars, but there's not much to it. It's just those Graham Nash and David Crosby, I think especially singing. And it's just amazing guitar. I always tried to learn it when I was a kid because it was such a beautiful piece, kind of Arthurian, impressionistic language. But a little did I know at the time it was in one of those weird tunings. That's another example, kind of like the Rain song of Led Zeppelin, of a song that once you know the tuning, isn't that hard to play. But if you don't know the tuning, it just sounds like alchemy or something. You can't, for the life of you, figure out what they're doing. And I gave up trying, and that just reminds me of how much we've changed in the world, technologically speaking, because I just remember trying to figure out that song, and there was nowhere to really learn it that I knew of. I guess by the book, but even then, you wouldn't really know where to put your fingers. Now with YouTube, 2 seconds. Here's how you tune your guitar. You put your fingers here in these kind of weird places because you're not in standard tuning, so you don't really have G chords and things. I don't play Glenevere that much because it's in a weird tuning, and you have to tune some of the lower strings up, as I recall. And I don't like doing that. I guess I could tune it down to D, but anyway, I don't like to detune my guitars much, but Glenevere to me is one of the great songs ever. This is Four-Way Street. This is a great album. Look, there's David Crosby, how I want to remember him. That's how we should remember him. Golden pipes, playing music, enjoying life. Is this the one? I think this is the album with Southern Man on it, the one you always hear, isn't it? It's a great look. You used to get in these albums, you'd get the there's Layla and other sort of love songs, Sonny and Cher, little advertisements on the sleeves. But this is a great album. This is Deja Vu, another great album. What's on here? I don't know these albums that well, actually. Carry On. Teach Your Children. Almost Cut My Hairs on here. Now that's a David Crosby classic. And Woodstock by Joni Mitchell, which I think of David Crosby when I think of that song. And Deja Vu. What a great Deja Vu. We have all been here before. This is a great album, actually from the 70s. And what's on this? Dark Star. Yeah, that's a good album. Cathedral. That's a good one. Because they had that kind of comeback without Neil Young. Of course, Neil Young had a big active solo career by this time. But I actually remember these albums a little better because I was like in high school when these albums came out. And I remember when he, had his trouble with the law and our BS war on drugs. He had to go to jail for a while, and I remember when he, had his health issues. He had that transplant back. I mean, I was first married when I think he had that, or hadn't been married that long, so that was like 30 years ago. And he lived a long time. Look, Greg Allman had one of those things and died a few years later, but his must have taken. He lived a long time. I also wanted to show you this. This, believe it or not, is a picture of Crosby, Stills, and Nash from that first album. And it was drawn by James Dean, the guy who does Pete the Cat. And it's not an original, but it's signed by him, and it's got one of those numbering, so it's a limited number. And my wife and I were actually friends with someone who was really good friends with that James Dean, the Pete the Cat guy. And my wife got me this for my birthday several years ago. But there's David Crosby. I love the 60s. I love the spirit of the 60s and some of the positive things about the politics of the 60s, like opposed war, especially BS wars and way off other countries that old people start and don't have to fight. I can think of a few wars today that are similar, where you have all these cheerleaders sitting there cheering people on, but they're not the ones out there dying. I can think of other examples like that. I'm not a pacifist, but I'm old enough to remember the Vietnam War. I wasn't old enough to serve in it, but I do remember when a lot of that was in the news a lot, and I had older friends and brothers, older friends with older brothers that went, and one of them from our church actually was killed over there. I didn't know him, but I remember everyone was so upset about it. And so I always think of that period, and the politics of that period were pretty different. And the thing about Woodstock, they would never let that happen today. That and David Crosby to me represents that spirit of Woodstock. And I sort of think he kept it to the end of his life, which is one reason maybe some people didn't take him as seriously. Musicians never get taken that seriously sometimes, I think. Keith Richards like that. But, David Crosby's one of those people that we don't always take that seriously. Maybe that's because he's a musician, and also because he never really grew up out of that 1969 mindset. I was never too much. It seems like in later years he got into partisan politics. Politics or having views and beliefs and freedom and so on. That's one thing, but I never have been into partisan politics, and I never thought David Crosby really. I don't think partisan politics is a good fit for any classic rocker that was at Woodstock. And so I never was too nuts about a lot of his politics later. But I did embrace the idealism and the belief in freedom. So I never thought David Crosby and a lot of really heavy partisan politics were a good fit, but I do really embrace the idealism and the belief in freedom that was at the source of a lot of his perspectives on the world, which I think came out of Woodstock. What a great figure. And, I don't think David Crosby, I don't really associate him with a lot of really big guitar. Stephen Stills played a lot of the guitar, and then Neil Young was kind of brought on to play a lot of guitar. But I think David Crosby was just a really musical player. He always probably played in tune, played with good dynamics, and sang great, and and wrote really creative, cool songs. And he had the soul of a poet, which you need. I think a lot of these shredders and things, they lack the soul of the poet. For the romantic and humanistic element of the tradition of the song, the balladeer. And I think David Crosby definitely had that. And I definitely mourn his loss, and I bet most of you do as well. Thanks. God bless.